She was sentenced to lose a hand for stealing bread. A war chief cut the chain and said, "Feed her now." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's incredible story. The harsh sun hung low over the dusty town of Jasper Creek, a small settlement tucked away in the unforgiving plains of the American West. It was a place where survival was not a given, where every step outside the town's borders could mean a fight for your life. That afternoon, the town square was buzzing with unease. Word had spread that Clara Whitmore, the daughter of the town's most indebted rancher, had been caught stealing bread from the local bakery. It wasn't the first time Clara had found herself in trouble, but it was the first time she was caught in such a desperate act. With the town facing a food shortage and Clara's family on the brink of losing their land, hunger had become a constant companion. She was weak from days without food, and her small act of stealing bread had been a cry for help, one that would cost her dearly. The townsfolk gathered in a circle around her, their faces twisted in judgment. Clara's hands were bound with rough ropes, and her head hung low in shame. The bakery owner, Mr. Thompson, stood at the front, furious and demanding justice. "She's no better than a thief, and thieves don't belong here," he shouted, his voice harsh. The sheriff, a burly man with a thick mustache, stepped forward. "It's not my place to argue," he said, his voice steady but cold. "The law is the law. She'll be sentenced according to town rules. As the punishment for stealing, she will lose a hand." Clara gasped, her heart racing in fear. The weight of her fate felt unbearable. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a death sentence for her future. As the crowd murmured in agreement, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. It wasn't unusual for strangers to pass through, but something about the rhythm of the approaching horses made the crowd pause. The atmosphere shifted from one of tense anticipation to one of curiosity and unease. A lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the setting sun. He was tall, dressed in a worn leather vest and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. The horse beneath him was powerful, moving with the grace of a creature that had been in the wilderness longer than most people had lived. The rider's gaze was piercing, his eyes scanning the crowd as he rode toward the town square. The sheriff and Mr. Thompson both stopped mid-sentence as the stranger dismounted. "What's going on here?" the rider asked, his voice low but commanding. He looked at Clara, then at the crowd, his presence radiating authority. "This girl has been sentenced to lose a hand," the sheriff said, his tone defensive. "She stole bread, and the law is clear." The rider's eyes narrowed. Then he looked at Clara again, his expression softening ever so slightly. Without saying another word, he stepped toward Clara and, with one swift motion, cut the ropes binding her. The crowd gasped. "She's not to be punished like this," the rider said firmly. "The law you follow is not one that values life. You'll feed her, not break her." The townsfolk looked on in stunned silence, unsure of how to respond. The sheriff hesitated, then spoke again. "And who are you to decide this? What gives you the right to come here and interfere?" The rider didn't flinch. "I am the war chief of the Blackstone tribe, and no one in my sight goes hungry without help," he said, his voice calm but powerful. As he spoke, he turned to Clara, his eyes locking with hers. "You are safe now. Come with me." For a moment, Clara stood frozen, her mind racing. The townspeople, some with pity and some with anger, watched as she took a hesitant step toward the war chief. He reached out his hand, not as a conqueror, but as a protector. The decision had been made. Clara was no longer a condemned prisoner. She was being offered a new path, one that could lead her into a future she never imagined possible. As the war chief turned to lead her away, he spoke one final time to the gathered crowd. "You have all seen what mercy looks like. Choose who you wish to be." The town fell silent once again, but this time, the silence was filled with uncertainty. Would they follow the Warchief's example, or would they continue to let hunger and desperation drive them to cruelty? Only time would tell. Clara walked beside the war chief as they left the town square, her heart still racing, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had been given a second chance, a lifeline from a man who was a stranger, yet somehow seemed to understand her plight. The weight of the Warchief's words hung in the air, a promise of protection, but also a challenge. He was a warrior, a leader of a tribe, and in the world Clara had known, such men were often feared, not trusted. But here, with him, things felt different. They walked in silence, the soft sound of their boots crunching against the dry earth the only noise between them. As they moved farther from the town, the landscape changed. The dusty roads gave way to more rugged terrain, the wide open plains stretching out on either side, framed by distant mountain ranges. Clara could feel the weight of the change around her. She was leaving the world she knew behind, stepping into something unknown. The Warchief led her to a small camp near a cluster of tall pines. A fire crackled in the center, surrounded by makeshift tents and a few horses tethered nearby. It was a humble place, but there was a quiet dignity in its simplicity. The Warchief turned to her as they reached the fire, his gaze steady and calm. "This is where we rest for the night," he said, his voice low but firm. "You are safe here, for as long as you need." Clara nodded, her throat tight. She was still trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to understand what it meant for her future. She had been condemned to lose everything, to become a shadow of herself, but now she was offered something else, a chance to rebuild, to find her place in a world that had almost forgotten her. She looked around the camp, taking in the faces of the people who had gathered by the fire. There were a few women, their faces weathered but strong, and several children, their eyes wide with curiosity as they watched her. The Warchief's people, she realized, were not the savage invaders the townsfolk had made them out to be. They were survivors, just like her. As the night settled in, Clara was given food. A simple meal of roasted meat and vegetables, something that felt like a luxury after days of hunger. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of a full stomach, and the sense of safety were more than she could have hoped for. She sat in silence, watching the flames dance as the Warchief and his people went about their evening routines. They were calm, purposeful, as though they had done this countless times before. The firelight cast long shadows, and for the first time in days, Clara felt herself relax. She wasn't sure where she belonged yet, or what her place was in this new life, but the Warchief's promise echoed in her mind. She was not a prisoner anymore. She was not just a victim. She was someone who had been seen, who had been given the chance to live. As the night grew deeper, the Warchief approached her again. This time, there was no urgency in his step, only the quiet authority of someone who knew how to lead. He sat across from her, the firelight flickering between them. "You are not what they said you were," he said, his voice soft but carrying a weight that made her look up at him. "You have no reason to hide anymore. You are part of something greater now. But you must choose if you want to stay or return to that life you fled." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had been given a choice. The Warchief was offering her not just protection, but a new beginning. She could stay with his people, join their tribe, and learn to live by their ways. Or she could return to the town that had condemned her. But could she ever return? Could she ever face those people again, after everything that had happened? She felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest, a mixture of gratitude, fear, and uncertainty. I don't know what to choose," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The Warchief nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You don't have to decide now. Take your time. But know this, you will never be alone here. You will always have a place among us, if you want it." Clara looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, but all she saw was truth. In that moment, she knew that whatever choice she made, she would not be making it alone. The Warchief's words had been a lifeline, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt like she might just have the strength to take it. Clara awoke the next morning to the soft sounds of the camp stirring to life. The sun had barely risen over the mountains, casting a golden hue across the rugged landscape. She could hear the murmurs of conversation, the sound of fire crackling, and the soft clinking of metal as the tribe's members prepared for the day. The Warchief had told her to take her time, to find her place, but Clara felt the pull of something greater now. She had been given a chance at a new life, and she wasn't going to waste it. She rose from the blankets she had been given, feeling the rough fabric of her clothing against her skin. The Warchief had provided her with clothes and shelter, and now it was her turn to contribute. She stepped out of the small tent, blinking against the morning sun, and saw the tribe's people moving about with purpose. Women were gathering water from a nearby stream. Children were playing under the watchful eyes of the elders, and men were preparing their horses for the day's hunt. Clara took a deep breath, the air fresh and cool, filled with the scent of pine and earth. She walked toward the group of women by the stream, feeling a slight nervousness rise in her chest. But as she approached, one of the women smiled at her, her eyes warm with kindness. "Good morning," the woman greeted her. "The Warchief has told us about you. You're welcome here." Clara smiled back, a sense of relief washing over her. She had expected to feel like an outsider, but instead, she felt a growing sense of belonging. "Good morning," Clara replied. "I'm grateful to be here." The woman nodded and gestured for Clara to join them. "We have much to do, but you are part of this now. We help each other." Clara stepped forward, joining the women by the water, and together they began to gather the supplies needed for the day. As they worked, Clara learned that the women of the tribe held great power, not just in their ability to care for their families, but in the way they supported each other. There was no judgment here, no expectation to fit into a mold. They simply worked together, each one contributing in her own way. As the day wore on, Clara found herself growing more comfortable. She helped with the chores, listened to the stories of the tribe's elders, and began to understand the way they lived. Closer to nature, more connected to each other, and without the harsh divisions of the world she had left behind. By evening, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The Warchief had not spoken much since the night he had taken her in, but his presence was always there, calm and steady. He watched over the tribe with a quiet strength, never demanding attention, but always ensuring that those under his care were safe. That night, as Clara sat by the fire, she found herself deep in thought. She had come to this camp a stranger, a woman broken by the world, but here, she felt like she was becoming something new. She wasn't just the victim of her circumstances anymore. She was part of something larger, something that valued her for who she was, not for what she could offer. The Warchief approached her as the stars began to fill the sky. He sat down beside her, his gaze steady. "You've done well today," he said, his voice low and calm. "The tribe has accepted you. You have a place here, if you choose to stay." Clara looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. She had come here with no plan, no sense of direction, but now, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could see a future, one where she wasn't defined by the past. "I want to stay," she said softly. "I want to learn, to help. I want to be part of this." The Warchief nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then stay. But remember, this is not just a home. It is a place of strength. You will have to earn your place, not through fear or punishment, but through respect and honor." Clara nodded, understanding. She had already learned that here, the tribe's strength came from its unity, from the bond each person shared with the other. "I will," she promised, her voice steady. "I will earn my place." As the fire crackled beside them, Clara felt a warmth in her heart that had nothing to do with the flames. She was beginning to realize that she had been given a gift far more valuable than she could have ever imagined. A second chance. A chance to build something new, to find a home where she was accepted for who she was. And for the first time, she felt like she belonged. The Warchief stood, offering her a hand. "Come, we have much to do. You are part of the tribe now." Clara took his hand, rising to her feet. Together, they walked toward the rest of the camp, the stars above them as their silent guide. In that moment, Clara knew she had found a new life, one she could embrace, one she could call her own. The days passed quickly for Clara in the camp of the Blackstone tribe. As the Warchief had promised, she had found a new life among them, one where there was no judgment, only understanding and strength. Each morning, she woke to the sounds of the camp stirring, the laughter of children, the low murmur of the tribe's members working together, and the crackling of the fire as it prepared for another day. She had learned the ways of the tribe quickly, from gathering firewood to helping with the horses, learning the old stories, and understanding the traditions that tied the people together. She had not expected to feel so at home so quickly, but the more she became part of the rhythm of life here, the more she realized how much she had been missing. The Warchief did not offer her special treatment. Instead, he treated her as one of his own, giving her tasks and responsibilities that tested her strength and resolve. He showed her how to use a bow and arrow, how to track through the wilderness, and how to move silently in the night. Clara learned that survival in this new world was not about brute strength, but about patience, respect for nature, and understanding the delicate balance that the tribe maintained with the land. As she grew stronger and more capable, Clara felt the distance between her old life and this one widening. She no longer thought of the town she had left behind, nor the shame that had once clung to her. The tribe had given her a new identity, one that was free from the weight of her past. One morning, as Clara was gathering herbs with a few of the women by the river, the Warchief approached her. His expression was serious, his posture as unyielding as ever. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "there are men approaching. Strangers." Clara looked up at him, a flash of worry crossing her mind. She had grown used to the quiet life in the camp, the sense of security that came with being away from the troubles of the world. "What do you mean?" she asked. The Warchief nodded toward the horizon, where dark figures were riding in the distance. "They are not from our lands. We must prepare." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had never known the Warchief to show concern for anything. His calm demeanor had always been unshakable, but now, there was a tension in the air. The tribe quickly went into action, with the men preparing their horses and the women gathering supplies. Clara was handed a bow and a quiver of arrows, her hands trembling as she held them. She had never faced a true threat before, not like this. The Warchief stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We do not fight unless necessary," he said softly, "but we are ready if we must." The sun had not yet set when the strangers arrived. They were a group of rough-looking men, wearing the tattered remnants of what could only be described as outlaw attire. Their horses kicked up dust as they rode into the camp, their eyes wary but unafraid. Clara stood beside the Warchief, watching the scene unfold before her. The men dismounted slowly, their hands resting on the weapons strapped to their sides. One of them, the leader, stepped forward, his eyes locking with the Warchief's. "We've heard of the Blackstone tribe," the man said, his voice gruff. "We're looking for something. Someone." Clara felt her heart race. She had no idea what they were after, but she knew it wasn't good. The Warchief remained still, his expression unreadable. "You will leave now," he said, his voice calm but firm. The outlaw leader laughed, a cold, harsh sound that seemed to echo through the camp. "We're not here to ask for permission," he said. "We've got business, and we don't take kindly to being turned away." Clara could feel the tension building in the air. She had been taught that the tribe did not fear conflict, but that they only fought when absolutely necessary. And it was clear that these men were not here to negotiate. The Warchief stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his knife. "You do not belong here," he said. "Leave, or face the consequences." The leader of the men hesitated, looking over at his companions. For a moment, Clara thought they might back down, but then the leader gave a nod. "If you want it that way," he said with a sneer. He reached for his weapon, and in that instant, everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The Warchief moved first, faster than Clara had ever seen him move. In a flash, he had disarmed the man, knocking the weapon from his hands with a single, precise strike. The other men drew their weapons, but they hesitated, unsure of how to react to the Warchief's speed and control. "This is your final warning," the Warchief said, his voice colder than Clara had ever heard it. "Leave now, and we will not harm you." The outlaws looked at each other, realizing they were outmatched. With a final glare, the leader signaled to his men, and they turned their horses around, retreating back into the wilderness from where they had come. The camp remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the rustling of the wind through the trees. Clara exhaled, her breath coming in short gasps. She had never seen the Warchief fight like that, but now she understood. This was why the tribe had followed him, because of his strength, his wisdom, and his unwavering sense of justice. The Warchief turned to her, his expression softening for the first time since the encounter began. "You are safe," he said, his voice steady. Clara nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She knew she had made the right choice by staying. She had found a new family, one that would protect her, no matter what. As the sun set behind the mountains, Clara realized that she was no longer running from her past. She was running towards something greater, a future where she could be herself, free from fear and filled with hope. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity for Clara. She had been fully accepted into the tribe now, not just as a member, but as someone who had proven herself capable and committed. She had learned how to set up camp, how to track game, and how to navigate the wilderness that stretched for miles in every direction. The war chief had kept his word, guiding her with patience and strength, always pushing her to be better, but never demanding more than she could give. Despite the calm and security the tribe provided, Clara couldn't help but notice that something had changed in the air. The tension from the day the outlaws had arrived had never fully dissipated. While the war chief had been able to handle the threat with ease, Clara knew that there were still dangers out there. One evening, as Clara sat by the fire, mending a small tear in her cloak, she overheard a conversation between the war chief and another elder of the tribe. "The settlers are getting closer," the elder said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to decide if we're going to stay and fight or move deeper into the mountains." Clara's ears perked up. The settlers had always been a distant concern, people she had only heard about in stories. The same settlers who had pushed the tribe's ancestors off their lands, forcing them to retreat further and further into the wilderness. But now, it seemed that the settlers were closing in, and the tribe would have to make a decision soon. Clara's heart raced. This wasn't just a distant concern anymore. She was part of this tribe now, and whatever decision they made would impact her too. She couldn't just sit idly by. She had to know more. As the evening grew darker, Clara approached the war chief. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with determination. "Are the settlers really getting closer?" The war chief looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, as if weighing her question. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said. "They are coming, and they will not stop until they have claimed what they believe is theirs." Clara's stomach tightened at his words. The settlers had always been the enemy, the ones who had caused the suffering of her people. She had seen the scars on the Warchief's body, the marks of battles long fought, and now she understood why. But something stirred inside her, a need to protect this new life she had found, a desire to ensure that the tribe's survival was not in vain. "What will we do?" Clara asked, her voice firmer now. The war chief stood up and gestured for her to follow him. They walked silently into the woods, away from the campfire's light. The trees grew thicker as they moved deeper into the forest, and the sounds of the tribe's camp faded behind them. Finally, the war chief spoke. "We will defend our land," he said, his voice calm but full of authority. "But we will not do it recklessly. We will fight with honor, and we will choose the time and place carefully. The settlers do not know the land as we do. They are not prepared for the challenges of the wilderness." Clara nodded. She understood. The warchief's words were not just about defending the tribe's physical land, but about defending a way of life, a way of thinking that was inextricably tied to the land itself. The settlers might want the land, but they would never understand it the way the tribe did. "What can I do to help?" Clara asked, her voice filled with resolve. The war chief turned to her, his gaze softening for a moment. "You have already done more than enough," he said. "But if you are willing, you can help us prepare. We need all of our people to be ready." Clara felt a sense of purpose flood through her. This was it. This was her moment to truly prove her place in the tribe, to show that she was more than just a woman who had been rescued from the brink of destruction. She was a warrior in her own right, a protector of the tribe. Over the next several days, Clara worked alongside the men and women of the tribe to prepare for the impending conflict. She learned how to move swiftly through the trees, how to hide tracks, and how to set up defensive positions that would give the tribe an advantage if it came to a fight. As the war chief had promised, the tribe's strength was in its unity, in its ability to work together toward a common goal. Clara had found a place within that unity, a role that was hers alone. She was no longer just Clara Whitmore, the daughter of a bankrupt rancher. She was Clara, a member of the Blackstone tribe, and she would fight to protect her new family. The night before the expected arrival of the settlers, the tribe gathered around the fire. The air was thick with tension, but also with a quiet sense of resolve. The war chief stood before them, his voice strong and commanding as he addressed the tribe. "Tomorrow, we will face the settlers," he said. "But we will not face them with hate. We will face them with honor, with courage, and with the strength of our people. This land is ours, and we will not give it up easily." Clara stood among the tribe, her heart beating strongly in her chest. She knew what she had to do. She had found her place in this world, and she would fight to protect it. The fire flickered before them, casting long shadows across the camp. The tribe's warriors stood tall, ready to defend their home. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the Warchief's words settle deep inside her. Tomorrow, they would face the settlers together. And together, they would fight for their future. The morning of the confrontation dawned gray and heavy, the clouds hanging low over the land, as if the earth itself was bracing for what was to come. Clara stood at the edge of the camp, her eyes scanning the horizon where the distant shapes of the settlers' wagons slowly appeared, cutting through the mist like intruders into a world they did not understand. She could feel the tension in the air, the collective heartbeat of the tribe pulsing in the soft wind. The warriors were ready, their faces grim but determined, their eyes filled with the quiet resolve of those who have fought for their survival time and time again. The women and children had been gathered further back, out of sight but within reach, as the tribe prepared to face the settlers head-on. Clara, though not a warrior by birth, had been trained and tested, and she knew that this moment would define her, just as much as it would define the tribe. She turned to find the Warchief standing beside her, his posture unyielding as he looked out over the land. "Today will not be easy," he said, his voice steady and calm. Clara nodded, her hand gripping the bow that had become almost as familiar to her as breathing. "I understand," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. The Warchief glanced at her, his eyes softening just slightly. "You have earned your place among us. Do not doubt that." Clara felt a surge of gratitude, but it was tempered by the weight of the moment. The tribe had done everything it could to prepare, but they were still outnumbered, and the settlers were not likely to back down. As the settlers' wagons drew closer, Clara could see their faces, rough, worn, but determined. The men were armed, some with rifles slung across their backs, others with pistols at their hips. There was no sign of hesitation in their movements, no sign of fear. They were here for something, and they would take it by force if necessary. Clara's breath caught in her chest, but the Warchief stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of both the tribe and the settlers. He raised a hand, signaling for the tribe to hold their positions, and as the settlers stopped at the edge of the clearing, a tense silence settled over the land. Clara watched as the leader of the settlers, a tall man with a weathered face and hard eyes, dismounted from his horse. He walked toward the Warchief, his steps slow but sure, his gaze never leaving the leader of the tribe. "You are the one they call the Warchief," the settler said, his voice thick with authority. "We've come for what's ours." The Warchief stood unmoving, his eyes locked with the settlers, as if measuring him. "This land is not yours to take," the Warchief said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of centuries of knowledge and tradition. "It has always been ours, and it will remain ours." The settler's jaw tightened, his hand hovering over the pistol at his side. "You're mistaken if you think we're leaving without it," he growled. The Warchief's gaze never wavered. "Then you are mistaken if you think we will allow you to take it without a fight." Clara's heart pounded in her chest as the tension grew thick. She could see the settlers shifting, a few of them looking to their leader for guidance, but the Warchief stood firm, his warriors silently waiting for his command. The air was electric, and Clara could feel the weight of every moment pressing down on them. The settlers were not backing down, but neither were they. A single command from the Warchief would ignite a battle that could change the course of their lives forever. The settler leader spat on the ground, his eyes flashing with fury. "You'll regret this," he muttered, but it was clear the Warchief had already made his decision. The Warchief raised his hand once more, and the warriors stepped forward, their movements swift and purposeful. "We will not fight for land," he said, his voice carrying over the growing murmurs of the settlers. "We will fight for our way of life. We will fight for those who have no voice." Clara stood tall beside the Warchief, her bow ready in her hands, her body tense and alert. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for honor, for the preservation of a culture that had endured for centuries. The settlers had come for land, but they had underestimated the strength of the people who called this land home. As the Warchief gave the signal, the warriors moved like shadows, swift and silent, surrounding the settlers with a precision that took them by surprise. The settlers were caught off guard, and Clara could see the fear flicker in their eyes as the tribe's warriors moved in, their weapons drawn but not yet aimed at their foes. "This is your last chance," The Warchief called out, his voice steady. "Leave now, and no harm will come to you." The leader of the settlers hesitated, his hand still hovering over his weapon, but the fear had set in. Clara saw it in his eyes, the realization that he had misjudged the tribe. With a nod, he signaled his men to mount their horses, and without a word, they began to retreat. The tension in the air slowly began to dissipate, but the threat was not over. Clara knew that the settlers would return, but the tribe had shown them a powerful lesson today, that they would never be easily pushed off their land. The Warchief stood silently, watching the settlers leave, his gaze unwavering. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly to Clara. "But we have won the first battle." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. This was their home, and they would fight to protect it, no matter the cost. She had found her place here, not just as a survivor, but as a protector of a way of life that was worth fighting for. Days passed in a blur after the settlers' failed attempt to take the tribe's land. Clara had become more and more integrated into the tribe's daily life. She had found her rhythm, learning the ways of the land, the language of the people, and the rituals that bound the tribe together. Yet, despite the newfound peace, an unsettling tension lingered beneath the surface. The Warchief had not spoken of the settlers since their retreat, but Clara could see it in his eyes. There was more to come, and it was only a matter of time before the tribe would face the real test of their resolve. One evening, as Clara sat near the fire, tending to a meal of roasted game and wild herbs, the Warchief approached her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different in the way he carried himself tonight, a seriousness that Clara had not seen before. "We need to speak," he said, his voice low. Clara stood immediately, her senses sharpening. "What is it?" she asked, unable to hide the concern that rose in her chest. The Warchief gestured for her to follow him as he moved away from the campfire. They walked in silence, the sounds of the tribe fading behind them as they ventured deeper into the forest, far enough that Clara could no longer see the flickering light of the fire. "I've been hearing rumors," the Warchief began, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are more settlers coming. They will not stop until they have what they want, and they will stop at nothing to get it." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected this was coming, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. The peace the tribe had fought for was fragile, and the settlers would not let it go easily. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising fear inside her. The Warchief paused, his eyes scanning the darkness around them, as if sensing an unseen threat. "Not much. They will come in full force. This time, they will bring soldiers, not just settlers." Clara felt a cold chill run through her. She had seen what the settlers were capable of, but soldiers, trained, armed, and ruthless, were a different kind of enemy. "What do we do?" she asked, her thoughts racing. "We prepare," the Warchief said simply. "We fight, but we do not make the first move. We will wait until the right moment. If they want war, they will have it." Clara nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The tribe had never been a group to act impulsively. They had lived for generations on the land, and their strength lay in their patience and their connection to it. But now, the time for patience was running out. The Warchief turned to her, his gaze piercing in the dim light. "You have proven yourself among us," he said, his voice firm. "Now, you must prove your loyalty. We fight not just for our land, but for the future of the tribe." Clara's heart raced. The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had found a new family, a place where she belonged, but now, she would have to defend it with everything she had. "I will fight," she said without hesitation. "For the tribe, for the land, for all of us." The Warchief's expression softened ever so slightly, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Good," he said simply. "We will need everyone. You will fight beside us, as one of our own." The next few days were filled with preparation. Clara worked alongside the other members of the tribe, gathering supplies, reinforcing defenses, and ensuring that the warriors were ready for the coming battle. She felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her, as the tribe's future hung in the balance. The Warchief had been right. They could not afford to make the first move, but the settlers were relentless. Clara knew that it was only a matter of time before they would come, and when they did, it would be the fight of their lives. On the eve of the battle, Clara stood at the edge of the camp, looking out at the distant horizon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. It was beautiful, in its own way, a stark, wild beauty that she had come to love. But it was also fragile, just like the peace they had fought to protect. The Warchief stood beside her, his presence solid and comforting. "Tomorrow, we will face them," he said. "But we will not face them with hate. We will face them with the strength of our ancestors, with the courage to defend what is ours." Clara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never known fear like this, but she had also never known the kind of purpose she felt now. She was no longer the woman who had run from her past. She was Clara of the Blackstone tribe, and she would fight to protect this land, this family, with everything she had. As the last light of the day faded, the Warchief placed a hand on her shoulder. "We fight tomorrow, but remember," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "we fight for more than just land. We fight for our way of life. For the future." Clara turned to face him, her resolve hardening. "For the future," she echoed. Together, they stood in silence, knowing that the next day would determine everything. The tribe would either stand, united in their strength, or fall to those who sought to take it all away. The Warchief looked at her one last time before walking toward the others. Clara followed, her heart set on the path ahead. Tomorrow would be the test of everything they had fought for, and Clara was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The sun had barely risen when the first signs of the settlers' approach appeared over the horizon. Clara stood at the edge of the camp, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the distant clouds of dust rising from the ground. The tribe was ready, and so was she. The days of preparation had led to this moment, a moment where she would prove her place among the warriors of the Blackstone tribe. The air was thick with anticipation. The Warchief, standing beside her, did not speak, but his presence was a steadying force. Clara took a deep breath and tightened her grip on her bow. She had never been in a battle like this before, but she was no longer the woman who had fled her past. She was part of something greater now, and she would fight to protect it. The Warchief turned to face the tribe, his voice carrying in the still morning air. "Today, we face the settlers," he said. "But we do not fight for land alone. We fight for our way of life, for our families, for our future." Clara nodded, her heart swelling. With pride, she was ready. The warriors moved into position, silently preparing for the coming conflict. The women and children had been taken to the safety of the deeper woods, away from the danger, but close enough to be ready if they were needed. The camp was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees. It was a peaceful scene, almost like the calm before the storm, and Clara knew that the storm was about to hit with all its fury. As the settlers' wagons drew nearer, the tension grew. The settlers had brought more than just men with rifles. They had soldiers, trained and armed, a much more formidable force than the tribe had ever faced. Clara's eyes narrowed as she watched them approach, the wagons rolling forward with purpose. The leader of the settlers, the same man who had confronted the Warchief days before, rode at the front, his expression hard and unforgiving. He had no intention of leaving without what he had come for. The Warchief raised his hand, signaling for the tribe to remain still. Clara could feel her muscles tense as the settlers drew closer. She could hear their voices now, the harsh commands being shouted between the men as they prepared to dismount. The time for waiting was over. The Warchief's voice rang out, steady and commanding. "Prepare yourselves. We will not back down." Clara moved swiftly, joining the other warriors in their positions. The Warchief's words had given her a new sense of purpose. She was no longer just a woman who had been rescued. She was a defender of the tribe, a protector of the land, and she would fight with everything she had. The first shots rang out, breaking the silence and shattering the stillness of the forest. Clara's heart raced as she ducked behind a tree, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The settlers had opened fire, but the tribe was quick to respond. Arrows flew from every direction, hitting their targets with deadly accuracy. The settlers were caught off guard, but they quickly recovered, returning fire with their rifles. Clara's hands moved with practiced ease, drawing her bow and releasing the arrows in quick succession. She could hear the battle around her, the thundering of horses' hooves, the clash of weapons, the shouts of the fighters, but she remained focused, her eyes locked on her targets. The Warchief moved with deadly precision, taking down one of the settlers with a single strike. His warriors followed suit, their movements swift and fluid, like shadows in the trees. Clara had never seen anything like it. The tribe fought as one, their unity and strength evident in every move they made. But the settlers were not backing down. The battle raged on, and Clara could feel the weight of the fight pressing down on her. She knew that the tribe was outnumbered, and the settlers had the advantage of guns. But the Warchief's leadership was something the settlers could not match. The tribe fought not just for survival, but for honor, for their way of life, and for the future of their people. As the battle wore on, Clara found herself face to face with one of the settlers, a tall man with a rifle in his hands. He was charging at her, his face twisted in anger, but Clara didn't hesitate. She drew her bow and released an arrow that struck him in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The fight was far from over, but with every warrior who fell, Clara could see the tide beginning to turn. The settlers were starting to lose their resolve, their fear growing with every blow they took. Clara's heart raced as she moved through the chaos, her senses heightened by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The Warchief was still fighting at the front, his presence a symbol of strength and leadership. The battle was reaching its peak, and Clara knew that this was the moment that would decide everything. As the sun began to set, the Warchief gave a signal, and the tribe pulled back, retreating into the trees. The settlers, battered and broken, were left standing in the clearing, their morale shattered. The Warchief stood tall, his warriors beside him, watching the settlers retreat. "This is our land," he said, his voice carrying across the battlefield, "and we will not let anyone take it from us." Clara stood with the tribe, her heart still pounding in her chest, but a sense of pride swelling within her. She had fought with honor, just as the Warchief had taught her. She had fought for something greater than herself, and she had won. The battle had been hard, but the tribe had proven its strength. The settlers had been sent back, but Clara knew this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But for now, they had won, and that was all that mattered. The days following the battle were filled with a quiet sense of relief, but the air was still thick with the knowledge that the tribe's fight was far from over. Clara woke early each morning, her mind heavy with the events that had unfolded. The settlers had retreated, but the Warchief had made it clear, this was not a victory that guaranteed peace. It was a temporary reprieve. As the tribe regrouped, Clara found herself once again beside the Warchief, helping to tend to the wounded, both of the tribe and the settlers. The battle had been hard, but it had not left them unscathed. Clara's hands were stained with blood, both from tending wounds and from the battle itself. It had been the first time she had fought for something greater than herself, and though her body ached, her spirit remained unbroken. The Warchief's leadership had guided them through the chaos, and now, more than ever, Clara realized that he was not just a leader by title, but by the respect he commanded from everyone. One evening, after the last of the wounded had been cared for and the tribe settled into their evening routines, Clara found herself standing by the campfire, staring into the flames. The Warchief approached her, his steps silent but steady. He had been a constant presence in her life since the moment he had taken her in, and now, she could see the weight of the battles ahead reflected in his eyes. "You did well," he said, his voice low. Clara turned to face him, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the past few days. "Thank you, but it doesn't feel like enough. The settlers are still out there, and we know they won't stop." The Warchief nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "They will not stop, and neither will we." Clara looked away, feeling the weight of his words. She knew he was right. The settlers would not rest, and neither could the tribe. But what would happen next? Could they truly protect their land forever, or would the settlers wear them down with time and numbers? "We will continue to fight," the Warchief continued, sensing her doubts. "But we must also think of the future. We cannot win this war with force alone. We need to strengthen our alliances, find new ways to protect what is ours. This is not just a battle for land. It is a battle for our way of life." Clara nodded, absorbing his words. She had learned much from him, but there was always more to understand. He wasn't just talking about battle tactics. He was talking about survival, about resilience, and about holding on to something that could not be taken by force. As the night grew darker, Clara thought of the future. A future that seemed uncertain, where the tribe's survival was not guaranteed. She thought of the other tribes, the The ones they had heard rumors of, some were allies, others were enemies, and many were simply surviving in the same way the Blackstone tribe was. There was strength in numbers, but there was also danger in alliances. Could they trust others, or would they be betrayed when the settlers came knocking on their doors? The Warchief's voice broke through her thoughts. You are strong, Clara. You have proven yourself not just in battle, but in spirit, and that is what will carry us through. His words were simple, but they struck a chord deep inside her. She had never seen herself as a warrior, but she had been fighting for so long, in ways she hadn't fully realized. She had fought for survival, for the tribe, and now, she had to fight for something even more important, hope. We all have a part to play. The Warchief continued, his eyes steady. You have found yours, and I trust you will continue to do so. Clara didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. She was no longer just a woman who had been saved. She was a fighter, a protector, and a member of the tribe who would stand beside them in whatever battles lay ahead. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. The tribe worked together to reinforce their defenses, building stronger barriers around their camp and setting up watchtowers in the trees. They trained for combat, but they also prepared for survival. The Warchief knew that they couldn't rely on strength alone. The settlers would come again, and when they did, the tribe had to be ready, not just for the fight, but for the long term. Clara worked alongside the others, honing her skills, but her mind was always on the bigger picture. The Warchief's words echoed in her thoughts. This was a battle for their way of life, and if they were to survive, they would need more than just weapons. They would need unity. They would need strength in numbers, but also the wisdom to know when to fight and when to wait. As the days turned into weeks, Clara's role in the tribe grew. She became more than just a warrior. She was a bridge between the past and the future, between the old ways and the new. She learned from the elders, shared stories with the children, and helped to shape the future of the tribe. The Warchief's faith in her had not only changed her, but it had given her a sense of purpose. She was no longer running from the past. She was walking into the future, side by side with the people who had become her family. And though the threat of the settlers still loomed large, Clara knew one thing for certain. She would face whatever came next with them. Together, they would fight for their future, and no matter what happened, they would not be broken. As the days passed, Clara could feel the weight of the tribe's survival pressing down on her. The Warchief had led them through countless challenges, but this battle, the one that would decide their fate, was unlike any they had faced before. The settlers had retreated for now, but Clara knew that they would return, and they would come with everything they had. The tribe had been preparing, strengthening their position, but Clara also knew that preparation alone would not be enough. The settlers were determined, and the tribe would have to be even more determined. One afternoon, Clara sat with the Warchief by the fire, watching the sun set over the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the heavy thoughts swirling in her mind. Do you think they will return soon? Clara asked, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. The Warchief, who had been quiet for a long time, finally spoke. Yes, he said, his voice steady. But we are ready. We will not let them take what is ours. Clara nodded, but something lingered in the back of her mind. She had seen the settlers' determination, their willingness to go to any lengths to get what they wanted. She couldn't help but wonder what the future held. What if they come with more soldiers? She asked. What if they bring more weapons? The Warchief's eyes met hers, and there was something in his gaze, something that told her he had thought of everything. They will come with everything, he said. But we have something they do not. Clara looked at him, waiting for him to explain. We have unity, he said simply. We fight together as one. That is our strength. Clara understood. The tribe had been through much, and they had always relied on each other. They didn't have the numbers, the weapons, or the resources that the settlers had, but they had something far more powerful, each other. And that, Clara realized, was enough. As the weeks passed, Clara continued to train with the warriors, honing her skills and preparing for the fight that was sure to come. She worked alongside the women, helping them prepare supplies and learning the ways of the tribe in ways she hadn't before. But her thoughts were always on the settlers. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were coming for more than just land. They were coming to destroy everything the tribe stood for. It was a fight for survival, and Clara knew that the tribe would have to fight harder than they ever had before. The war chief continued to lead with the wisdom and strength that had earned him the respect of the tribe. He had seen much in his life, and he knew that this fight would not be won easily. But he also knew that the tribe had something that no one could take away: their spirit, their resilience, and their unwavering belief in each other. The day the settlers returned came sooner than Clara expected. The sky was overcast, and a sense of foreboding hung in the air. The tribe had prepared, but the tension was palpable. Clara stood at the edge of the camp, watching as the first signs of the settlers appeared on the horizon. The war chief had ordered everyone to remain in position, to wait for the settlers to make the first move. Clara's heart raced as the settlers' wagons came into view. There were more of them this time, their numbers growing with each passing day. Clara could see the soldiers among them now, armed and ready. This would not be the same as last time. Clara gripped her bow tightly, her fingers trembling with anticipation. She knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about defending the land. It was about defending everything the tribe stood for. The war chief stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the approaching settlers. "We will wait for the right moment," he said quietly. Clara nodded, her breath steadying. She had learned to trust the warchief's instincts. He knew when to fight and when to wait. And now, they would wait. As the settlers grew closer, Clara could feel the tension rise in the air. The tribe was ready, but so were the settlers. This would be a battle for more than just land. It would be a battle for their very existence. Clara looked at the war chief one last time, her heart pounding in her chest. He gave her a small nod, and she knew that this was the moment. The settlers had crossed the line. It was time to fight. The war chief raised his hand, and the tribe moved in perfect unison. Clara followed, her heart steady, her resolve unwavering. This time, they would not be caught off guard. This time, they would fight with everything they had. The battle that followed was fierce and relentless. The settlers had the advantage of numbers, but the tribe had the advantage of knowing the land, of fighting for something they held dear. Clara moved with the warriors, her bow aimed with deadly precision as she took down one settler after another. The sounds of the battle were deafening, but Clara's focus never wavered. She could see the fear in the settlers' eyes as they realized they were outmatched. They were fighting for land, but the tribe was fighting for their future. As the sun set on the battlefield, the war chief stood tall, watching as the settlers retreated once again. They had lost, but the tribe had proven that they would not be so easily defeated. Clara stood beside him, breathing heavily, her body bruised but unbroken. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The war chief turned to her, his expression one of quiet pride. "You have done well," he said, his voice steady. Clara nodded, her heart still racing. She had fought for the tribe, for their future, and for the land they called home. And she would continue to fight, no matter what came next. The days following the battle were filled with quiet reflection, but Clara could not shake the feeling that the peace they had fought so hard to maintain was fragile, like the calm before a storm. The settlers had retreated again, but Clara knew that they would not stop. This was a fight that would not end until one side had claimed the land, and the tribe had no intention of letting go of what had always been theirs. The war chief had gathered the tribe, as he had done countless times before, to discuss the future. The fire crackled brightly in the center of the camp, and the tribe's warriors sat around it, their faces serious, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. Clara sat with the others, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She had proven herself on the battlefield, but now she was beginning to understand that survival required more than just strength. It required wisdom, strategy, and unity. The war chief stood before the tribe, his presence commanding the attention of every warrior and elder present. "We have won this battle," he began, his voice calm but firm. "But the war is far from over. The settlers will return, and they will come stronger, more prepared. We must be ready." Clara's thoughts raced as she listened to the war chief. He was right. The settlers had more numbers, more resources, and more soldiers at their disposal. The tribe's survival depended not just on fighting, but on outthinking their enemies. "We need to strengthen our alliances," the war chief continued. "We need to reach out to the other tribes, to unite against this common threat. We cannot face this alone." Clara understood the urgency of his words. The tribe had always been isolated, relying on their own strength and the land, but now they needed allies if they were to survive. But Clara also knew that forming alliances with other tribes was not without risk. There was a long history of distrust and conflict between the different tribes, and the Warchief was asking them to put aside their differences for the greater good. What if the other tribes refuse? Clara asked, her voice steady but filled with doubt. The Warchief looked at her, his eyes softening with understanding. Then we fight alone. But I believe that if we show them our strength, they will join us. Clara nodded, though a part of her remained uncertain. The idea of forging alliances with other tribes was risky, but it was a risk they had to take if they were to have any hope of surviving. Over the next few days, the Warchief sent out messengers to the neighboring tribes, seeking allies. The tribe gathered their best warriors and prepared to move out, knowing that their future depended on the outcome of these alliances. Clara was among the group, and she could feel the weight of the journey ahead pressing down on her. The land was vast, and the tribes they sought to meet were spread out across miles of treacherous terrain. As they traveled, Clara's mind was filled with doubts. What if the other tribes refused to join their cause? What if the settlers had already begun to rally their forces, preparing for another assault? But she knew there was no turning back. She had made a promise to the Warchief, and to the tribe, that she would fight for their survival. They were more than just warriors. They were a family, and Clara had found a place among them. One evening, after a long day of travel, the tribe stopped to rest near a river. The firelight flickered in the distance, and the sounds of the wilderness filled the air. Clara sat by the fire, her thoughts drifting back to the day she had first met the Warchief, and how far she had come since then. She had been a woman running from her past, but now she was a part of something much larger. The Warchief approached her, sitting beside her in the quiet of the night. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, the Warchief turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You have come far," he said quietly. "You have proven yourself not just as a warrior, but as someone who understands what it means to fight for more than just yourself." Clara met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. She had come far, but the road ahead was still uncertain. "I'm ready," she said simply. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect the tribe." The Warchief nodded, his expression softening. "I know, and that is why you are one of us now." The next morning, the tribe continued its journey, crossing rivers and climbing mountains, moving steadily toward their destination. Clara could see the resolve in the faces of the warriors around her, each one determined to secure the future of the tribe. She had never felt more a part of something in her life. The Warchief's words echoed in her mind as they traveled. They were fighting not just for survival, but for a way of life, for a future that could not be taken from them. Days turned into weeks as they traveled through the rugged landscape, meeting with other tribes along the way. Some were skeptical, hesitant to join forces with the Blackstone tribe, but Clara could see the Warchief's strength and conviction win them over. Slowly but surely, the alliance began to take shape. By the time they reached the last tribe, Clara could feel the weight of their journey lifting. This was the final test. If they could win this tribe's support, they would have a true fighting force. The leader of the final tribe, a tall woman with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, looked them over with a steely gaze. "Why should we join your fight?" she asked, her voice as cold as the mountain winds. Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Because we fight for something worth saving," she said. "We fight for the future. We fight for the land that has always been ours. And we fight for each other." The woman studied Clara for a long moment before nodding. "Then we fight with you." Clara felt a surge of hope fill her chest. The alliances had been formed, and together they would face the settlers once again. The journey had been long, and the battle was not over, but Clara knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a woman fighting for survival. She was part of something much greater, a force united by purpose and a future worth fighting for. The air was thick with anticipation as the newly formed alliance of tribes prepared for the final confrontation. Clara stood at the edge of the camp, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the settlers' forces were rumored to be gathering. The moment they had been preparing for had finally arrived. The land was on the brink of being torn apart, and the tribes were ready to defend it with everything they had. Clara could feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. She had gone from a woman running from her past to a leader among the Blackstone tribe. She had fought for survival, for the future, and for her place within the tribe. And now, She would fight for something even more important, freedom. The war chief approached her, his expression solemn but filled with a quiet strength that had never wavered, even in the darkest of times. "We are ready," he said, his voice steady. "We fight today, not just for this land, but for our future, for the future of our children and their children." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of pride. She had trained for this moment, learned the ways of the warriors, and stood side by side with the strongest people she had ever known. They had united, and their strength lay in that unity. "I'm ready," she said, her voice strong, filled with the resolve she had gained over the past months. The war chief smiled faintly, his gaze turning toward the warriors preparing in the distance. "You are more than ready. We all are." The battle preparations were swift but careful. The warriors took their positions, their movements like clockwork, a well-oiled machine ready for the test ahead. Clara stood with the other women, who were preparing the supplies, tending to the horses, and ensuring that the warriors would have what they needed in the coming hours. They knew their role in this battle just as well as the men did. They would fight to protect their people, to ensure the tribe's survival. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, the war chief called the final meeting. The tribes had gathered in their positions, the alliance ready to take the fight to the settlers. Clara felt the air grow heavier, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. The war chief raised his hand, and all eyes turned to him. "Today, we make our stand. We fight with honor, with courage, and with everything we have. We will not be moved from this land. We will fight as one, and together, we will win." The tribe cheered, their voices rising in unison, a collective strength that vibrated through the earth. Clara could feel the energy coursing through her, the determination of every warrior, every woman, and every child who believed in the tribe's cause. The settlers would not take their land. Not today. The war chief turned to Clara, his eyes softening slightly. "Remember, Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "We are not just fighting for land. We are fighting for our way of life, for everything we believe in. Our strength is in our unity, and in the land that has always given us life." Clara nodded, taking in his words. She understood now more than ever. This was about more than just survival. It was about preserving a culture, a history, and a way of life that could never be replaced. The warriors moved out, the battle lines drawn as the settlers began to approach. Clara's heart raced as she gripped her bow, her fingers steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. She had faced battles before, but this one felt different. This was the battle that would define the future. The first clash of weapons rang out like thunder across the land, the sound of battle reverberating through the trees. The settlers had come in full force, their numbers overwhelming, but the tribe stood firm. Arrows flew through the air, striking down their targets with precision. The tribe fought not just with their weapons, but with the strength of their hearts, and Clara could feel the power of their unity. The war chief was at the forefront, his presence a beacon of strength. His warriors followed him without question, moving as one, their every action coordinated and precise. Clara joined them, her bow drawn tight, her focus sharp. She had learned to fight with purpose, to fight with honor, and now, as the settlers advanced, she did just that. The battle was brutal, but the tribe held its ground. The settlers had the advantage of numbers, but the tribe had something the settlers could never match: their connection to the land, and their unshakable belief in what they were fighting for. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the settlers began to retreat, their morale broken by the tribe's fierce resistance. The war chief raised his hand again, signaling for the warriors to hold their position. The settlers had not yet given up, but the tribe had made it clear: this land was theirs, and they would not back down. The battle raged on for hours, but as the night fell, the tide had turned. The settlers were being pushed back, their forces scattered. The war chief and his warriors had fought with unmatched determination, and the settlers had been unable to break their lines. Clara stood amidst the chaos, her breath heavy, but her spirit unbroken. She had fought with everything she had, just as the tribe had done. And now, as the battle drew to a close, she knew that they had won. The settlers had been driven back, and the tribe had proven its strength. The war chief stood beside her, his gaze steady. "We have won," he said quietly, his voice filled with pride. Clara nodded, exhaustion creeping into her bones. But she felt something else: victory. They had fought for their future, and they had won. The tribe had held its ground. Together, they had faced the settlers, and together, they had claimed victory. Clara had found her place. This was her home, and she would fight to protect it for as long as it took. The days that followed the battle were filled with a sense of quiet triumph, but also with the understanding that this victory was not the end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter for the tribe. The settlers had been pushed back, their plans thwarted, but Clara could sense that the fight for the land was far from over. As the tribe began to rebuild, to tend to their wounded and gather their strength, Clara stood beside the Warchief, watching as the people worked together to restore their camp. The land was scarred by the battle, but the resilience of the tribe was stronger than ever. They had fought for their way of life, for their future, and they had won. The Warchief had spoken of alliances, of building bridges with other tribes to ensure their continued survival, and now, with the settlers temporarily defeated, those plans could move forward. Clara had learned much in the past few months: how to fight, how to survive, and, most importantly, how to belong. But what she had learned most of all was the power of unity. The tribe was more than just a group of people. It was a family, and together, they were unstoppable. One evening, as Clara stood near the fire, watching the flames dance in the cool night air, the Warchief approached her once again. His expression was thoughtful, but there was a quiet pride in his eyes. "You have done well, Clara," he said, his voice steady. Clara turned to face him, her heart swelling with the weight of his words. "I've learned so much from you," she replied. "From all of you." The Warchief nodded. "You have become a part of this tribe, and that is a bond that cannot be broken. Your journey is far from over, but you have proven your place among us." Clara felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had found a family in the tribe, a purpose that gave her life meaning. And now, with the Warchief's approval, she knew that her future was secure. But there was still work to be done. The settlers would eventually return, and the tribe would need to be prepared. Clara was no longer afraid. She knew that as long as they stood united, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Warchief's words echoed in her mind as the days passed. "We fight for more than land. We fight for the future." The tribe began to rebuild, stronger than before, their unity unshaken by the trials they had faced. They worked together to fortify their camp, to grow their resources, and to prepare for the inevitable return of the settlers. Clara continued to train with the warriors, honing her skills as a fighter, but also as a leader. She had learned that true strength came not from the weapons they carried, but from the bonds they shared. And that strength, she knew, would carry them through whatever came next. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara sat with the Warchief by the fire, watching as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky. It was a peaceful moment, one that seemed to stretch on forever. The Warchief turned to her, his expression as steady as ever. "The future is ours, Clara," he said. "As long as we remain united, there is nothing we cannot overcome." Clara looked up at the sky, her thoughts drifting back to the journey that had brought her here. She had started as a woman with nothing, no family, no home, no future. But now, she was part of something greater. She was a member of the Blackstone tribe, a protector of their way of life, and a warrior for their future. "We will stand together," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We will protect this land, and we will protect each other." The Warchief smiled faintly, his gaze filled with pride. "You have come far, Clara, and I have no doubt that you will continue to grow. The tribe will always stand with you." Clara nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle within her. The tribe had proven its strength, and now it was time to focus on the future. The settlers would come again, but Clara knew that the tribe would stand firm. They had already won the most important battle, that of unity, and with that strength, they would face whatever came next. The fire crackled beside them, the warmth from the flames mingling with the cold night air. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her journey settle in her chest. She had found her place, her family, and her purpose. And with that, she knew she was ready for whatever the future held. The Warchief's voice broke the silence once more. "We will face the future together, Clara, and we will not be moved." Clara smiled, her heart filled with pride and hope. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would protect the future of the Blackstone tribe.